All right, Shabbos, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for today's share, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Yanki and Eliza Statman and Yitzi and Rebecca Statman for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in commemoration of the first yard site of their sister, Menucha Shendel Yehudis, Zichron Livracha, Bas David Yosef. And to thank Shmuel and Rabin Karapkin for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the 25th yard site of Rabin's mother, Pesa Mira Bas Chaim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families in Nechama. With that, let us begin. We have a really interesting sugya ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chav Tes 29. 29, and we are picking up Emir Hashem on Chav Ches base 28b, right at the two dots. Right at the two dots. Let's actually begin 2, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom. Last word on the line. Hari Netios Elu Karban. So if you remember again, we had an interesting case in the Mishnah, right? So remember again, here was the case. This was at the end, the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Aleph, the bottom of 28a. So the Mishnah's case was as follows. The Mishnah said, Hari Netios Elu Karban im Einon Niktsatzos. So let's just go through the case just a moment. I have saplings, and I say these saplings should be a karban if they are not cut down. Okay, so let's just play this out. In other words, obviously, it sounds like, what's my intention with this neder? What's my intention with this neder? Right, my intention with this neder, ultimately, again, I'm sorry, yeah. So, right, my intention for these saplings is to get them cut down. Right, so that's why I say if they're not cut down, ultimately, again, they'll be a karban. They'll be a karban, which means that if they are cut down, there's no problem. That's why, again, the Mishnah says, so ultimately, again, yesh lahen pidyon, they have redemption. Fine. Now, I will say, second case in the Mishnah was hari netios ha'elu karban ad shiikatzitzu, right? Which means what? Literally, again, these netios should be a karban until they are cut down, right? These hari netios ha'elu karban ad shiikatzitzu, until they are cut down. So we'll say, this is the reverse case, right? So in other words, they should be a karban up until the point they are cut down. Okay? So therefore, again, what it sounds like is once they're cut down, they're right, as long as they're in the ground, they are treated with sanctity, they have sanctity. Once they are cut down, they would lose that sanctity. That's what it sounds like. However, the Mishnah says, Ein lehen pidyon, they have no redemption. So let's analyze this. Says the Gemara. So we'll say we're starting again, 2, 4 lines up from the bottom. So as the Gemara says, Uli Olam, they never have redemption. So again, I both say, so once again, let's just clarify what's happening over here. So this is the second case in the Mishnah. I have saplings. I say, Hare netios elu karban ad shiikatzitzu. These netios have carbonic sanctity, right? Our carbon, until they are cut down. So the Mishnah says, this never has redemption. So the Gemara says, really? It never has redemption ever? The Olam, you can never redeem it? So the Gemara says, Amar bar Pada, Padan chozros v'kachos, Padan chozros v'kachos. So we'll say what this means is like this. So we'll say, okay, let's play this out once more, because we're spending pretty much today on this case. I have my saplings. I say these saplings should be vested with carbonic sanctity. They should be like a carbon, right? Literally again, until I cut them down. So the Mishnah says they cannot be redeemed. So the Gemara says, what does that mean they can't be redeemed? In other words, I remember again, in general, you say, I go ahead and I say, this shtender should be like a carbon. So we'll say, what's the halacha when you say this shtender should be like a carbon? What's the halacha? It's vested with sanctity. What can I do with it? I can redeem it. Right? Like anything else vested with sanctity, right? How do I do that? Essentially, I could transfer the sanctity of the shtender onto money. The money becomes sanctified, and now the shtender becomes chulin. So I don't understand. So I have these saplings. I say they should be like a carbon until they're cut down. So Mishnah says, oh, you can't redeem it. Why can't you redeem it? So Bar Pada says, here's why. Because if you redeem it, so Amar Bar Pada, Padan, if you redeem them, chozran v'kachos. The moment you redeem it, the sanctity sets right back in. You see, you made a neder. What was your neder? These saplings should be sanctified until they are cut down. So even if you redeem it, what happens right after redemption? The sanctity revests immediately. So padan chosros v'kachos, ad shikatzitzu. Now, there is an end to this. The end to this is when you cut down the saplings. At that point, once you cut down the saplings, niktzitzu, once they're cut down, podan pam achas v'dayo. Shabbos says, this is very interesting. So what Bar Pada says is when the Mishnah says that the saplings cannot be redeemed, that means if I try to redeem the saplings while they're still attached to the ground, every time you redeem it, ultimately, again, the Kedusha just devolves upon it again. Because remember, it's subject to a neder. So because it's subject to a neder, you redeem it, becomes kadosh. Redeem it, becomes kadosh. However, once you cut it down, you could redeem the sanctity of those saplings once and for all, and then they go out to chulin. Shabbos say, this is the position, ultimately, again, of Bar Pada. They will say, if you take a look at the Ran for just a moment, it's the Ran, probably about 20 lines up from the bottom. Niktzitzu podem pamachas v'dayu. Tisrile the Bar Pada, shava b'shalo egdishon ela adshi kantzitzu, afilu hachi ki niktzitzu lo paka kidushasan bikadi. They will say, this is incredibly important. There are two parts to Bar Pada's position. Part number one, Rabbi will say, is that the neder you made keeps those saplings rooted in a state of carbonic sanctity. And therefore, you can't redeem it. And even if you try to redeem it, right, even if it's quote-unquote redeemed, it just becomes immediately kadosh again. There's that cycle. There's a cycle. So there's no redemption while ultimately the saplings are attached to the ground because that was your neder. Your neder was, these saplings will be like a carbon as long as they are attached to the ground. So there, part one is no redemption. And even if you redeem it, becomes automatically kadosh again. That's part one. Part two is that even once you cut down the saplings, see, I would have thought that once I cut down the saplings, what happens to the carbonic sanctity? It's gone. Bar Pada says no. The carbonic sanctity, once it's vested on the sapling or in the saplings, it remains. Now the difference is once you cut down the saplings, you can redeem it once and for all, and now it goes out to chulin. So we'll say we call that lopaka kidusha bikadi. Kedusha just doesn't go away by itself. Doesn't go away by itself. The carbonic sanctity is there in the saplings. Once it's cut down, now you could redeem it and remove it forever. This is the position. I will say, by the way, what a statement. Kedusha lopaka bikadi. Once you have kedusha, it doesn't just go away, right? Kedusha remains. Now, chas v'shalom, person could engage in a maisa to remove their kedusha, but that kedusha is always within the object. Again, we'll come back to that in a little bit. V'ula amar, so we'll say that's Bar Pada. Ula says, no. Kevan sheniktzitzu shuv ein podin. Ula says, once you cut down the saplings, that's it. The carbonic sanctity is gone, and you don't have to redeem them. Now, I will say, it sounds like over here that Ula agrees with Bar Pada in the first part. Namely, if you try to redeem those saplings while they're attached to the ground, what's the halacha? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. In other words, even if you redeem it, it just becomes kadosh again. Where does Ula disagree? Ula holds once you cut down the saplings, we're done. No act of further redemption is necessary. Ultimately, again, because the carbonic kedusha simply dissipates from the saplings upon their being cut down. Rabbi say, take a look at the Ran again. So also now about 19 lines up from the bottom. V'ula amar kevan sheniktzitzu shuvein podin. The svirle she'en kedushasan nimsheches ela ad osazman shekdishan. So Ula says, look, the way this neder worked, Rabbi say, is it was a kedusha with a durational kedusha, right? What was the durational kedusha? What was the neder? These saplings should have carbonic sanctity as long as what? As long as they're attached to the ground, right? Or until they're harvested. Once it's cut down, Ula says, done. There's no longer any kedusha attached to it. Aval me'ososman ve'elech paka kedusha bikedi. So say, this is the phrase. The machlokes Bar Pada and Ula is in paka kedusha bikedi. Does kedusha, the sanctity, go away by itself? That's Ula. Once you cut it down, the saplings are totally chulin. Or lo paka kedusha bikedi. Kedusha does not go away by itself. Does not go away by itself. And therefore, again, that's Bar Pada. That's why according to Bar Pada, even once you harvest the saplings, you're still going to have to engage in an act of redemption. So we'll say, that's our fundamental machlokes, but it sounds like everyone is agreeing on what? That while those saplings are attached to the ground, if what? if you try to harvest them, if you try to redeem them, what's the halacha? They will not be redeemed, right? Even if you redeem it, it just automatically becomes kadosh over and over again. Beautiful. Top of Chatas, Rabbosai. Top of Chatas. Really interesting machlokes. Amrli Rav Hamnuna. So Rav Hamnuna said as follows. Rav Hamnuna said, Kedusha shebahen lehechan halcha. So now Rav Hamnuna is asking on Ula, right? Because Ula holds, once you cut down those saplings, then what happens? The Kedusha goes away. Paka Kedusha bikidi. The Kedusha goes away with nothing, right? Just by itself. So Rav Hamnuna says, how does that happen? In other words, they will say Kedusha is a state of being, right? Kedusha is a state of being. So at the end of the day, normally if something has a consecrated status, it can be removed, but it requires a process. Where do we ever see just simply Kedusha going away by itself? Kedusha shebahen lehechan halcha. Where did the Kedusha go? Uma ilu amar leisha hayom at ishti ulamachar at ishti minafka beloget. I will say, let's say a man were to say to a woman, right, today you are my wife and tomorrow you're not my wife. Right? Some people try this, but it doesn't, right? And it says, so in other words, in this case over here, he's being mekadesh her, for example, with a tenai. Hariat mikudeshes li hayom ulamachar ein at ishti. Now, I will say, so the truth is, what he wants to do is he wants to marry her, but then tomorrow he doesn't want to be married. So I will say, so does that work? I mean, again, he could choose to not be married to her tomorrow, but what does that require? What does it require? A get. What is Rav Hamnuna saying? When you create a certain state, a certain reality for an object, okay, here is not about an object, it's not about a person. When you create a certain state for a person or for an object, then what's the halacha? The state just doesn't go away by itself. It needs some type of process or mechanism to remove the current state. So just like a woman will require a get in order to go ahead and remove her married state, ultimately, Rav Hamnuna is saying to Ula, when those saplings are cut down, the Kedusha is still there. The Kedusha doesn't go away by itself, and therefore, again, should require some level of pidyon, of redemption as well. So Amalei Rava says to Rav Hamnuna, come on, that doesn't make any sense. Mi kamedam is Kedushas dam le Kedushas haguf. That's not a fair comparison, I will say. When a woman gets married, that's a case of what we'll call Kedushas haguf. There's a physical state. There's a physical change. Say nachinami, when you're talking about, again, a physical change, when we say a physical change, meaning a change that impacts the guf, then of course everyone will agree that in order to remove that status, you need some type of redemptive mechanism. However, again, I will say, when we speak about the saplings, I will say, for example, when I say my saplings are like a carbon until I go ahead and cut them down. So I will say, what does it mean like a carbon? What does that mean? Like a carbon for what does that mean? I will say, that's monetary sanctity. It's monetary sanctity. I will say, by the way, let's go back for just a moment. It's no different if I say this shtender should be like a shlamim. What am I saying? That I will say that I'm endowing it. Obviously, the shtender can't be a carbon shlamim. So what am I endowing it with? It's not kedushas haguf, but it's kedushas damim. So therefore, again, I'm saying in the shtender case, if I were to redeem this, let's say for $100, then what? What do I do with that money? That money is used towards the purchase of a shlamim. So the Gemara suggests over here, mikam damis kedushas damim kedushas haguf, kedushas damim paka bikidi. We'll say if something only has financial sanctity does go away by itself. Kedushas haguf lo paka bikidi. Conversely, kedushas haguf, physical sanctity, does not go away by itself. So I will say, so look what Rav is trying to do right now. Rav is trying to do, he's saying, Rav Hamnuna, leave Ula alone. Because the truth is, Ula's case is a case of financial sanctity. I say, these saplings should be like a carbon until they are cut down. Now they're cut down. Ula says, they're not Kaddish. I says, Rav Hamnuna, what happened to the sanctity? Right? Kedusha doesn't go away by itself. A haraya. Man says to a woman, you're my wife today, not my wife tomorrow. The first part works. She's his wife. But Lamaise, if he wants to remove that marital status, that requires a mechanism, a get. So Rav Hamnuna says, how can you say Kedusha just goes away? Rava, no. The case of netios, the case of saplings, is financial sanctity. Financial sanctity, Kedushas damim, does go away by itself. If there's a change in status, that sanctity could simply evaporate. Kedushas Haguf requires a mechanism to remove sanctity. Incredible. I would say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi just says over here something very interesting on the right-hand side. In the short lines, 3 lines in, Mi kamadamis Kedushas Haguf, Hani netios de kadishi, lepedia kadishi, Kedushas damim. When I sanctify, when I say that these netios should be like a carbon, I will say I'm just vesting them with financial sanctity. Ulahachi paku me'achar sheniktzitzu. And therefore, according to Ula, as soon as I cut them down, the kedusha simply evaporates. Aval isha kedushas hagufhi ulahachi lo paka b'kedi. And therefore, again, kedushas haguf does not go away by itself. Amr le Abaye. So Abaye says, one second, let's analyze this. So kedushas haguf lo paka b'kedi. Is that true? Is that true? That if an item has physical sanctity, that physical sanctity doesn't go away by itself? Is that actually true? So the Gemara says, let's listen to this. That Tanya we learned, this is such an interesting case. Shar zeh ola kol lamed yom, ula acher lamed yom shlamim. So we'll say, let's say a person says like this, I have a shar, I have an ox, and I say this ox for the next 30 days will be an ola, and after the 30 days should be a shlamim. Should be a shlamim. So what's the halacha? Right? Ula acher lamed yom shlamim. So what's the halacha? Kol lamed yom ola, ula acher lamed yom shlamim. Okay, so we'll say, so what's the halacha? The halacha is the Tanai works. So for the first 30 days, the animal will be an ola. Which what does it mean the first 30? In other words, if I offer up the animal, in the next 30 days, it's offered up as an ola. And if I don't offer it up in the first 30 days, but I offer it up in the second 30 days, then what? It's a shlamim. So it works. It works. So the Gemara says, I will say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. A lot of Rashis today. Rashi says, Kol lamed yom have ola. Rashi says, Kimo sha'amar ula achar lamed yom yotze mikedushas ola v'havish shlamim. So I will say, so what's happening over here is this animal transitions from ola sanctity to shlamim sanctity, right? So first 30 days, ola sanctity. Second 30 days, ultimately again, shlamim sanctity. So the Gemara says, va'amai. So amai, kedushas haguf ninhu upaka bikedi. So we'll say, but why should this work? Why should this work? After all, again, this is a case of kedushas haguf. In other words, we'll say, presumably what we're saying over here is what? I'm saying this ox should have the kedusha of an ola for the next 30 days. So we'll say, I don't understand. When 30 days elapse, where does the kedusha of the ola go? In other words, how does it just come to an end without some type of process? Rather, I will say the fact that this animal transitions from being an ola to a shlamim after 30 days tells you that what? Even physical sanctity goes away by itself. Look at Rashi again. Amai nafka mikedushas ola ha kedushas haguf ninhu upaka bikedi. The kashilu ula damar kedushas haguf la upaka bikedi. So I'll say, so just so you following the progression over here, right? Ula said, let's go back to the sapling case. Ula said, when you cut down the saplings, what's their status? What's their status? Chulin, right? Nothing. And what process do you need to remove their kedusha that they had? Kedusha as carbon. What process do you need? None at all. None at all. So we'll say, why? Rava explained that Ula is talking about a case of kedushas damim. All the saplings have is financial sanctity, and financial sanctity goes away by itself. But even Ula would agree that in the case of physical sanctity, if something has physical sanctity, and now you want to remove that physical sanctity, what do you need? What do you need? Some type of pidyon, some type of redemptive process. The Gemara says, really? Because here's a case of kedushas haguf, right? I say this animal should be an ola for the next 30 days, and then should be a shlom for the 30 days after that. So comes day 31, the animal is no longer an ola, now it's a shlamim. Says the Gemara, how did that happen? That's a case of kedushas haguf, physical sanctity. So how does an animal simply transition from an ola to a shlamim without any type of redemptive process? Rather, what do you see over here? You see over here that perhaps even kedushas haguf goes away by itself. So is this not a contradiction to ula? To which the Gemara says, no, hacham askinon. What's the case? The amr ledami. I will say the case over here is where it's financial sanctity. It's financial sanctity. In other words, when I say this animal should be an ola for 30 days, and that a shlamim for the next 30 days, I'm not actually designating the animal as a physical carbon. Rather, what I'm doing is investing it with financial sanctity. Okay, so financial sanctity, I know, goes away by itself, according to Ula, without any type of redemptive process. By the way, I will say, I'll just show you something interesting. If you take a look at the Rush, see the Rush in the right-hand column? So probably about 12 lines in Kedushas Damim Paka. You see that? So the Rush says, Dechihechi de Paka Ayidei Pedia, Paka Nami Ayidei Kavios Zman. I will say, it's actually very interesting. Let's take a step back. Because what everyone seems to agree with, well, not everyone, obviously Barpada disagrees with this, but Ula's position is that when something has financial sanctity, ultimately, again, that sanctity goes away by itself. So why is that? In other words, what's the logic behind that? In other words, Rava made that distinction in the Gemara that Kedushas Damim goes away by itself, Kedushas Haguf needs a process. Why? So the Rosh says something very interesting over here. He says, So the Rosh makes an interesting observation. He says, Kedushas Haguf, everyone agrees, Rabbi saying, that you could redeem an item, Kedushas Damim. Everyone agrees that you could redeem an item that is vested with financial sanctity, right? How do you do that? You just transfer the sanctity onto other money, onto some other financial instrument. So the same way that an item vested with financial sanctity can be redeemed with money, it can also be redeemed simply with the elapsing of time. Aval Kedushas Haguf, de lo paka al yedei pedia, lo paka nami al yedei kaviyasman. But the Rosh says, if you have something vested with physical sanctity, that cannot be redeemed with money. So I'll say, for example, if you go ahead and I say, this sheep is an ola. I'm literally going to offer it up as an ola. It will say, can you redeem that with money? No. So the Rosh wants to suggest, essentially, anything that can be redeemed with money could also be redeemed simply through the elapsing of time. Through the elapsing of time. But anything that can't be redeemed with money cannot be redeemed simply through the passage of time. So I will say, again, just kind of to plug this back in. So therefore, according to Ula, the sapling case is a case of Kiddush Rabbi, right? Everyone agrees with that. When I say my saplings should be a carbon until they are cut down, now let's say, obviously, I'm not offering up those saplings as a carbon, right? It's clear that when I say like a carbon, I mean financial sanctity. So Ula comes along and says, well, an item that's vested with financial sanctity could be redeemed with money. So anything that could be redeemed with money also could be redeemed through time. Therefore, once they're cut down, they automatically become chulin without any type of additional pidyon. Anything that is vested with Kedushas Haguf, by definition, cannot be redeemed with money. So the same way that it can't be redeemed with money, simple passage of time is not going to allow it to become chulin as well. Okay, so now, however, what we've just done is we've just shown a case where even something with Kedushas Damim seems to become chulin on its own, or seems to lose its kedusha on a chulin, seems to become kedusha on its own, loses kedusha on its own. So remember again, I have an animal. What do I say? This animal ultimately again should be an ola for the next 30 days, and then from days 31 through 60, it should become a shlamim. And the Gemara says, it works. How could it work? What happened to the ola sanctity? Where did it go? To which the Gemara says, no. This is not a case of physical sanctity. Rather, what is this? Case of financial sanctity. Okay. Ihachi, here's the problem with this explanation, says the Gemara. Ihachi, ema seifa. Look at the end of this brisa. What's the end of it? Say, ihachi ema seifa. The achar lamed yom ola ome achshav shlamim. So we'll say, the seifa case here, we'll say, is listen to this. I say, after 30 days, this animal should be an ola, but for now, for these 30 days, it should be a shlamim. So we'll say, in this case, I'm reversing the order. Right? I'm making the animal a shlamim first, and then an ola afterwards. Okay, so the Gemara says, by the way, that works as well. So we'll say, now what's the shaila? So we'll say, so now, why do I need two cases? Right, so in case number one, I say this animal should be an ola for the next 30 days, and then a shlamim for the 30 days after that. In case number two, I say this animal should become an ola in 30 days from now, but for the next 30 days, it should be a shlamim. So what, okay, and both cases work. So why do you need both cases? See if you want to tell me one case is talking about Kidushas Haguf, and one case is talking about Kidushas Damim. Oh, then I understand. Hainu Amud Beis Rabosai. Hainu the Itztrich Le'Letana Lemisni Tarti. Then Rabosai, I understand what? I understand why the Tana has to quote two cases. I get that. I understand why the Tana has to quote two cases. The Sakadait Chamina, because I would have thought what? Sakadait Chamina, Kidushas Haguf Lo Paka Bikidi, Kidushas Damim Paka Bikidi, Amotu Lahachi Tana Tarti. Supposed to say, now watch this. If you tell me that one of the two cases is talking about where I vested the animal with Kidushas Damim, financial sanctity, and one of them is where I vested the animal with Kidushas Haguf, now both cases are necessary. Why? Because Rabbosai, the case, everyone agrees in the case of, not everyone, but so now in the case of Kidushas Damim, I understand that sanctity could go ahead and simply dissipate on its own. But I didn't know, I would not have thought that that applies in a case of Kidushas Haguf. Kamash Malon, it does. Kamash Malon, it does. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, both in a case of Kiddush Rabosai. So whether or not you said this animal is an Ola and then a Shlamim, or a Shlamim and then an Ola, one case is Kiddushas Damim, one case is Kiddushas Haguf. And what is the Brisa coming to teach me? What is the Brisa coming to teach me? That Kiddusha dissipates on its own. Kiddusha dissipates on its own, whether it's Kiddushas Damim or Kiddushas Haguf. That's what the Mishnah is coming to teach me. But I will say, if both cases are financial sanctity, then why do I need two cases that teach me the same thing? I will say, you follow what's going on over here? So at the end of the day, here's what I have, right? Here's what I have. Two cases in a brisa. Case number one, this animal should be an ola for the next 30 days, and then it should be a shlamim. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? It works. It works. You are right, it works. Case number two, in 30 days from now, the animal should be an ola, and for the next 30 days, the animal should be a shlamim. What's the halacha? It works. Okay? It sounds like the same case twice. So the Gemara says, if you're telling me that both cases are financial sanctity, and therefore what is the Brisa teaching me? That financial sanctity has the ability to dissipate on its own without any redemptive process, then the Brisa is redundant. However, if you tell me one case is where the animal has financial sanctity, and one case is where the animal has physical sanctity, Kiddusha Saguf, oh, now you're teaching me something important. That Kiddusha dissipates on its own in both of those cases, both in financial sanctity as well as in physical sanctity. Essentially, what's happening when we say Kiddusha dissipates on its own, what that means is, if you attach that Kiddusha to a time frame, right, as we did in this case, for the next 30 days, the animal should be X, and then for the following 30 days, the animal should be Y. Even if it's physical sanctity, it dissipates on its own, then that's a Chiddush. Then I understand why you need both cases. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is the message from us from this price. In other words, we already knew from Ula that financial sanctity dissipates on its own. The Chiddush over here is what? Is what? Even physical sanctity, Kiddusha Haguf, has the ability to dissipate on its own. Now, this would seem to pose a kasha to Ula, but would be a very interesting development for us. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe not. Eliyamrit idi ve'idi Kiddusha Damim, la'amalei mistatarti. Hashta yish lomar, bekedusha chamur lekedusha kala paka, mikedusha kala lekedusha chamur tzricha lemeimar. Now, both I understand one thing. Let's throw one more wrinkle into this, which is, although the cases sound the same, they're not. Right? Remember again, case number one is ultimately, again, for the next 30 days, the animal should be an ola, and then it should be a shlamim. Second case, for the next 30 days, it should be a shlamim and then an ola. I will say ola has higher sacrificial sanctity than a shlamim. So I will say, so the truth is, the Brisa is problematic in general, right? Which is, once you have that first case, if they're both talking about Kiddushas Damim, physical sanctity, it goes without saying, because case number one is you're going, let me read it inside again. So the Gemara says, if you want to tell me that both cases of the Brisa are both talking about physical sanctity, why do I need two cases that say the same thing, namely that physical sanctity dissipate on its own? Furthermore, I will say, if the first case, remember what was the first case of the Brisa? Right? For the next 30 days, the animal is an Ola. For the 30 days after that, the animal is a shlamim. The Brisa says it works. Now, if we're talking about financial sanctity, so I will say, if you're telling me that it works from an animal transition from an ola to a shlamim, which is kedusha chamura likidusha kilta, right? Ulta likidusha kala, that's greater intensity, carbonic intensity, to lesser carbonic intensity. Nikidusha kala likidusha chamura tzricha lememar. I will say that I don't need a case of telling me the animal could transition from a shlamim to an ola. That's obvious. So therefore, what Rabbi say? Therefore, lema teheve tiyufta de barpadas. Therefore, Rabbi say the Gemara suggests. So I'm sorry. Before we get to that, the Gemara says it must be that the two cases of the brisa, one is financial sanctity and one is physical sanctity. And I will say, what is the takeaway of this brisa? That both financial sanctity, right, kidushas damim, and kidushas haguf, physical sanctity, can what? Can dissipate on their own without any redemptive process. I will say, when we say dissipate on their own, what does it really mean? How does it dissipate on its own? You still need something. In this case, what do you need? What do you need? Time. In other words, if I attach the kidushas haguf to a clock, then once the clock runs out, ultimately again the kedusha dissipates on its own. I will say, I just want to point out, is very simple. I'm seeing a couple of bewildered looks. It's simple, right? Let me see you know who you are, right? Let me simplify this. Simplify it very simply. Let's go back to the Mishnah for just a moment because we're going to get right back on track. Let's go back to the Mishnah. What was the case of the Mishnah? A quick chazara. It's the advantage of having short napim. A little bit of chazara. Right? So we'll say, what's the case of the Mishnah? I have saplings. I have 10 saplings. What do I say? These saplings should be like a carbon until I go ahead and cut them down. What's the halacha? So obviously, right, the halacha is, the Mishnah said, they cannot be redeemed. Okay, so now let's qualify this a little bit. So what does it mean they can't be redeemed? So it sounds like everyone is agreeing, when can't they be redeemed? While they're still attached to the ground, which makes sense. I made a neder to say that they should be like a carbon. So because they should be like a carbon, they can't be redeemed when they're attached to the ground. Okay, now what happens? We'll say, so that's part one. Step two, or part two of this story is what happens? I cut them down. So we'll say, now what's the shaila? So now I have 10 felled saplings, right? 10 felled saplings, right? Sitting on my, I will say, now what's the shaila? What's their status? Right? What's their status? Or stated indifferently, these had carbonic sanctity, right? At least financial sanctity. What do I do with them now? So I will say, so comes along Barpada says you have to redeem them. Because even once you cut them down, they still retain their carbonic sanctity, and therefore they need pidyon. They need to be redeemed. Right? Ula came along. That was Barpada. Ula said, what do they need? Nothing. Why? Because again, Ula holds, I will say, so now if we bring this all together, Ula holds that Kidushas Damim Paka Bikidi. Anything that has physical sanctity, right? That sanctity could go away by itself. Now again, by itself, it doesn't literally mean by itself. It needs a trigger to dissipate the financial sanctity. What Ula is saying is time could be that trigger. In other words, I went ahead and made the financial sanctity of the saplings, it was intertwined with the saplings being attached to the ground. So once they're no longer attached to the ground, that financial sanctity evaporates. There is no pidyon. You don't have to redeem it in any way. Now, Rava wanted to suggest that Barpada's position that Kedusha could only go away on its own, only refers to what type of sanctity? Financial sanctity. But Rava wanted to suggest that everyone agrees when it comes to physical sanctity never goes away on its own, but rather, again, it needs some type of pidyon, some type of redemptive process. So I will say, what did the Gemara do? The Gemara seemed to disprove that assertion. I will say, because what did the Gemara do? The Gemara brought this brisa, and this brisa is the case of where I'm giving an animal an Ola designation for 30 days, and then after that it becomes a shlamim. Then I will say, there's two cases. So to make a long story short, the Gemara says it must be that one of those two cases is referring to what? Physical sanctity, Kedushas Haguf. And yet, what do you even see by Kedushas Haguf? What do you see? that it could also go away on its own, again, if it's tethered to time, without any redemptive process. Without any redemptive process. Shabbos say that's where we're holding right now. So it sounds like, so again, Ula's teaching me that if something has financial sanctity, that Kedusha could go away on its own. What we call Kedusha Paka Bikdi. Kedusha could go away on its own. What the Gemara is floating over here, Rabbi say, is the possibility that maybe even physical sanctity, maybe even Kedushas Haguf could go away on its own as well. Good. That's the entire sugya. Rabbi say, now let's go. Lema Tevet the Barpada, the Amar Lo Paka Kedusha Bikdi. Rabbi say, this entire time we've been shepherding Ula. But 1 second. All of this is a huge kasha on who? On Barpada. Rabbi say, let's go all the way back. I make a neder, these saplings should be like a carbon until I go ahead and cut them down. And now I cut them down. What does Barpada say? What does Barpada say? What's halacha? You have to redeem it. Rabbi say, what Barpada is saying is even in the realm of financial sanctity, Kedusha doesn't go away on its own. So says the Gemara, whoa, this whole sugya, right? We're bothering Cheppering Rava about whether or not physical sanctity goes on. So Rava say, but what do you see from all of this? It's almost like taking for granted that physical sanctity goes away on its own, or financial sanctity goes away on its own. Rava say that's a direct refutation of Barpada, because Barpada says when I cut down those saplings, I have to redeem them because they still retain their financial sanctity. Amra Papa. Barpada will tell you like this. The truth is, I will say, now the Gemara wants to suggest the carbon case that we just brought on the Brisa, right? For the next 30 days, the animal should be an Ola, and for the 30 days after that, the animal should be a Shlamim, or for 30 days from now, the animal should be an Ola, but for the next 30 days, it should be a Shlamim. In that case works. The Gemara says that whole thing is a refutation of Barpada. Barpada will say, no. The truth is, I can answer that up. Amar Papa, Amar the Barpada, this is what it means to say. Listen to this. Imlo Amar me'achshav shlamim li'achar lamed yom olahavi. This is very interesting, I will say. The way Barpada interprets the Brisa is like this. So I'll say, watch this. If I have an animal, if I don't make it a shlamim for the next 30 days, then in 30 days from now, it could become an ola. Meaning what? According to Barpada, the novelty of the Brisa is you could create a delayed carbonic designation. In other words, I could make an animal a carbon I could vest an animal with carbonic sanctity to take effect when? 30 days from now. But it only works if what? If during the next 30 days, you didn't vest it with any other carbonic sanctity. So for example, I can go ahead and say, in 30 days from now, the animal should be an Ola. I could do that. As long as what? As long as now for the next 30 days, I don't make the animal a shlamim. Because if I make the animal a shlamim within the next 30 days, then what, Rabbi say? Then what? That status remains. It doesn't go away, and it never makes room for the Ola designation in 30 days from now. That's how Barpada reads the Brisa, which, to be very honest, is a shocking, absolutely shocking reading of the Brisa, because it doesn't really seem to read that way. But that's ultimately, again, how Barpada understands. Rabbi say, Barpada says, what are you bothering me? This Brisa fits perfectly with me. Right? Barpada says, I believe any kind of sanctity, be it financial or physical, doesn't go away on its own. And that's exactly what the Brisa is teaching me. According to Rabbi Rabbi, if you go ahead and you say, this animal should be a shlamim for the next 30 days, and then become an olam 30 days from now, what's the halacha according to Barpada? What's the halacha according to Barpada? What's the halacha? It works, but which part works? It's a shlamim. Does it ever have the ability to become an olah? Absolutely not. Because once you vest that animal with shlamim sanctity, whether it's physical shlamim sanctity or financial shlamim sanctity, that's it. That's the designation that remains, and it does not go anywhere. It does not leave. What Barpada said, what the Brisa is telling us, however, if you go ahead and you say, in 30 days from now, this animal should become an olah, that'll work, as long as you don't make it a shlam in the interim. Midi dahava, so what you'll say to yourself, what's the novelty in that? Of saying that the animal could become a carbon in 30 days from now, what's the novelty in that? It's actually very interesting. Maybe dahava ha'omer leisha his kachi la'achar lamed yom. It's like a man who says to a woman, "Become mikudeshes to me after 30 days." The mikudeshes. Rabbi say that works, right? The delayed kiddushin. Hariat mikudeshes li. Right, in 30 days from now, it works. Rabbi say, what's the novelty in that it works? Afal pishnis achlu hamos. Rabbi say, now the novelty by kiddushin is, remember again, a man gives a woman kesef kiddushin. And he says to her, right, he gives her a ring, gives her a pruta. And he says, here's your kesef kiddushin. Hariat mikudeshes li bekesef zu la'achar shloshim yom. Okay, so we're not married for the next 30 days. I don't know what his plans are for the next 30 days, right? But Lamaisi, he does not want to be married for the next 30 days, right? Like there's a trade show in Vegas, right? Everyone has a trade show in Vegas, right? So I'll say, so again, right? So hariat mikudeshes li la'achar shloshim yom, right? So Lamaisa again, so I'll say, so now it works. It works. Now what's the chap? The chap is it works even though what? In 30 days from now, the money's gone. Right, let's say she spent the money or she lost the money. Even though there's no money in 30 days from now, halacha l'maisa, it works. So the Gemara says, so pshita is in other words, Rabbi says, let's take a step back for just a moment. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. At the end of the day, so it's obvious that it works in both of these cases, both by ishus and by karbanos. Lo tzricha da haderbe. So I'll say, no. What's the novelty over here? I will say, first off, you look at the Ran says over here, actually, I'm sorry, not yet. Pshita. It's 3 lines up from before the lines get wide. Pshita, kolomar, pshita, de mahani ki hasam, velama le litana la ashma inon. As I will say, at the end of the day, the fact that delayed kiddushin will work, so obviously delayed carbonic designation will work as well. In other words, what's the big novelty in all of this? To which the Gemara says, "Lo da haderbe." Now, I'll say what's interesting is the novelty is where you try to renege. That's the novelty. Let's say you put a Tanai like this in place, and then you try to renege on the Tanai. So Rabbi say, listen to this. So hanicha leman damer eno choseres. So Rabbi say, so again, let's first speak a little bit about kiddushin. So Rabbi say, so imagine a man says to a woman, "Hariat mikudeshes li," right? Bekesef zula achar shloshim yom, and then he has a change of heart. And then he decides to go ahead and get out of this. So Rabbi says, so what's the halacha? So there's an opinion that says in a choseres, which would seem to be the same. You can't renege. Elamad amar choseres, ma'ikal amimar. Rabbi says, according to the opinion who says that he can renege within those 30 days, what is there to say? To which the Gemara says, afilu lamand amar hasam choseres. I will say, even according to the opinion that says that by kiddushin you can renege. So, right, a man says to a woman, and he gets cold feet within the 30 days, and he wants to renege. Even according to the opinion that says he can renege, the carbon case is going to be different. I will say, if you go ahead and you say this animal should be an ola for Hashem after 30 days from now, you cannot renege. Why can't you renege? Gemara says, "Hachashayni da amiraso legavoa kimisiraso lehedyot." Ultimately, again, Rabbi say, because why? We say that ultimately, again, amiraso verbally designated something to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, i.e., for carbonic status, is no different than giving something over to a regular person. So I will say the same way. If we were engaged in a transaction, if I was selling you a sheep, so it would be the halacha, right? Once I go ahead and I give it to you both sides, then what? I just say, you know what? I'm very attached to that sheep. I want it back. What's the halacha? We'll say, what's the halacha? That's it. We're done. Transactionally, we're done. I handed over the item. So I'll say, interestingly enough, verbal commitment to karbanos is the same thing as physically handing over something in a mundane transaction. The same way, once you hand over the object, transaction is closed, no reneging. So to what? So to halacha l'maisa, verbally committing myself to give a karban is the same thing. So even though, again, I verbally committed myself for 30 days from now, nevertheless, that verbal commitment is, what is unretractable, irretractable? Right? Unretractable. You can't take it back. So we'll say that's the incredible chiddush. So we'll say we're going to stop over here for today. So I know we're kind of stopping middle. So we'll say, see, here's what we've got. We have a fundamental machlokas, Bar Pada and Ula, about does kedusha dissipate on its own. Bar Pada is saying absolutely not. Ula is saying absolutely yes. Now, Ula is commenting specifically in a case of financial sanctity, and it sounds like by financial sanctity, right? Not besides Bar Pada, everyone's going to agree that halacha l'maisa, the kedusha goes away. The interesting case is going to be about kedusha saguf, physical sanctity. Does physical sanctity ultimately go away on its own, or does there have to be some type of redemptive process associated with it? And I will say furthermore again, Barpada, different interpretation of the brisa. So that's our machlokes. Great. So that machlokes is still, we haven't solved it yet. How to read that back into the Mishnah also about the Esr Netios. Emir Hashem, tomorrow, Shkoyach.
It's like a total convoluted.
It's you.
Because you could teach the Braita